now because we get to speak about class. You hooking me up there, Brother Caleb? All right. Where's the clicky? Here it is. My apologies. I'm going to do one more thing. We have changed the channel on the TV. You want to set that where I can see it. Great. Samuel loves remotes. And we'll set this up here. So yeah, Samuel loves to play with remotes. But anyway, Brother Wesley is taking care of our sister Dinah here. He said that y'all had like 4 appointments or something today. And 2? It's about too many for me to want to go to. And so with a bunch of other stuff going on, I said, tell you what, let me take over. I'll take care of tonight. And talking about encouraging us. So this one's just a little bit out of the vein of encouragement. But still, we want to talk about things that, as humans, things that we cannot comprehend about God. And so the idea was, we're going to take 3 things, 3-part sermon. It looks like all of us are here, so I'm just going to go march all the way through this thing. And hopefully, well, the idea was we'll use the 3rd one as when everybody gets back together for our Devo, or evening thought. But anyway, wisdom, God's eternal nature, eternity, and how we can't understand that because we're encapsulated in this thing called time, and also love. And this is a weird way that Kenny's mind works. It was somebody said Kenny's mind works in mysterious ways, and I hope everybody can read that. I'm sorry for making the font too small, but if we can read it. These are also going off the notes that were jumping in my head over the past few years on putting this thing together. And excuse me for jumping all over the place, but mankind has always been curious, right? We try to figure out, why does this thing work? What makes a firefly glow? What's the stuff inside it? And so we measure things, and then we quantify these things with there we go. So with measuring tools, and then we take these measurements and we put them together and understand them through this human thing called science. And then we build upon the science. So a little bit of science here, and then we build a little bit more, and we get a deeper understanding of a little bit more science, and so forth. And then crazy people like me will put together these concepts of science and say, okay, if this part does this and we know how this thing works, I can take this particular concept and apply it and make a widget to understand this other thing. That's what engineering are all about. You got math, and you apply that math to science, and then you apply science, and then you've got technology or engineering. And then so we try to make the world better through our understanding of science. Problem is, science is all man-made. Our understanding of science, the nature that God has presented to us is still there. It is His. It is His to understand, to know. And we are not to know all of it, but we try to understand part of it. And so for that, we've created math and science. So, in it, Brother Robert, you might like that little one. So just a quick little analogy, applying math and basic physics. That's a ballistics chart. So it's the way that, I just pulled it off because it looked cool. It shows, okay, we know gravity is going to work at this amount. It's going to pull a bullet down. So therefore, if we aim a trajectory up a little bit, we understand that it should hit at our crosshairs at a particular distance. And that's what math and science is all about. We apply the things that we know to make things that we want to work, if all that makes sense. Okay. But so all of this comes down to our understanding with our 5 senses that we've got. All right? We all learned them in first grade. And sight, we get like 80% of all our concepts of everything that's around us through our eyeballs. Hearing, touch, taste, and smell. And then we also have a sixth one that nobody really talks about. That's motion. I'll get into that later. But our inner ear, you close your eyes and you can step around and say, or you can be pushed around and you know, I'm being moved, right? So it's a sixth sense we never talk about, but we can apply those things. But what if God has more than just these five senses that we have? Just saying, just what if? God's not limited by our understanding of things. Now, we do know that God created man in his image, and so we can take that, but we are not to limit ourselves. We are not to limit God in what he can do and say and speak. And this is an open class. If y'all got anything, just raise your hand or shout or something. So, 1 Corinthians 5:20. Where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of the sage? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? Excuse me. In Job 28:28, and to man he said, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. To depart from evil is understanding. Ultimately, we don't have to get smart and learn everything. Job says it right there. Fear God, that is wisdom. That's the wisest thing that we can do. And the end of Ecclesiastes ends essentially the same way. And Psalm 104:24. O Lord, how many are your works? In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your possessions. The song How Great Thou Art comes to mind. And I understand that the original words were mighty and works. Comes from this. Comes from right here. Jumping on. Uh-oh. Let me mash the right button here. Hey, Caleb, mash me one forward, please, sir. Yeah, I'm not mashing the right button. Okay. So in order to help us understand wisdom, y'all remember I guess it was about 15 years ago now, Brother Noby Stone, Dr. Noby Stone from over at Mayfair came out here. And he presented a lesson, or a series of lessons. I think it was a whole quarter that we did on it, on why we have the faith to believe in what we do. And he introduced this concept of a book called Flatland. Anybody heard of that? Anybody seen it? All right, Brother Burl hasn't, though. All right. Yes, it's a book of, like is on the cover there, A Romance of Many Dimensions. Who's not seen it? So, okay. Yes, ma'am. Okay. So, what it's about is it's written by a guy's named Edwin Abbott, a square. He did a play on his own name. But imagine, he wrote this thing from the perspective of a two-dimensional world. How does that work? Okay. Because we live in three dimensions. But imagine that we live in this character there, he writes in the first person, lives in a two-dimensional world where he sees everything along a line. But he can see objects out there in space, and he can tell their distance because there's like a haze coming between it. But anyway, he can tell all these characters on board this plane have different numbers of sides. It was written in Victorian England, so women didn't mean much. Women were represented by little bitty lines, but men were represented by triangles, right? So if you had just a triangle with three sides, that was the lowest class of society. And as you would, as the characters in this world, this flatland, would progress, their children would inherit more sides. So his son might have four sides, and he would become a square. And then his son, if he did well, would have five sides, and so forth. And then, so these little characters would develop more and more sides. And the highest members of society would have the most number of little facets around their side, right? Well, what happens when you get an infinite number of facets going around? You make a complete circle, right? But the problem was, in this land, nobody was perfect. And so also, if you did poorly, your sons would have one side less than you would. So if you had done well, and you've got like 4 sides, and this might be like a college degree, if you didn't do good, then your son would only have 3. And so it was the concept is there. Y'all understand? Okay. Well, this little square is sitting there in his house one night, or I guess laying there in his house, because he lives on a 2-dimensional plane, and he hears a voice, and he looks around. There's nobody there in the house. So he goes outside the house, and he looks around on this plane, and there's nobody there. And he says, "Who's talking? I don't see anybody here." And then this voice says, "I'm speaking to you from outside this plane, from outside this, from your plane, from outside your world. There's another dimension." It can't be another dimension. There's only 2. So all of a sudden, he sees this perfect circle enter into his sight, and he's like, "What's wrong? That ain't right here." Because also, perfect circles didn't exist because nobody's perfect, right? But here's a perfect circle that comes around, and it comes into his sight, and then so he charges at it, thinking that, okay, maybe I'm going to kill this guy, I'm going to poke him, but he just disappears. And then eventually, he reasons with him, and then the circle says, "Look, I am a sphere. I live in a 3-dimensional world. I will prove to you." So he pulls him this square out of there and shows him a 3-dimensional world. And he says, and he looks down and says, "Wow, my world really is just a plane." So then, now this square goes back into his 2-dimensional world, and he's trying to create the concept, or teach the concept to everybody that, hey, look, this really exists. So where does this where does this come into the scripture? God's greater than our dimension, or our understanding of, we'll say, 4 dimensions. We've got X, Y, and Z, and then we also live in a time dimension. But God lives outside of what we can see and what we understand. Luke 4:29 and 30. I'll just read from this one. "And they got up and drove him out of the city and led him to the brow of the hill on which the city had been built, in order to throw him down the cliff. But passing through their midst, he went his way." Y'all know this story. This is the account where Jesus is, he said, "Look, before Abraham was, I am." And they're like, "This is blasphemy. You have to recount that right now." And Jesus says, I can't. But right here, but passing through their midst, it's as if Jesus just kind of just like, boop, popped up out of that plane and re-entered that plane on flat land. I don't know how he did it, but we read the account right here that he did it. John 8:59. Yes, sir. Brother.
Hey, I just want to go back for a second to, I think, the beginning slide and talk about the things that we know as finite, limited human beings. Is what we know is through our 5 senses.
Right, yeah.
So what we're looking at here is that 6th sense, or that 6th dimension, if we wanted to call it something like that. So we can only know what we know because that's how God created us, but then faith comes along. So
We have to apply faith for everything. And I've done another study about how is there science in faith? Or a better question, is there faith that we have to take in the realm of science? And the answer is absolutely. We have to take, and there's a lot of blind faith, a lot of wrong faith placed in science too. You look at the theory of evolution that Darwin. Now I'm not okay. That life evolved from a little cell and all these things. It just doesn't. The timelines just don't agree. But there's a lot of faith that a lot of folks place in all those steps. It's not necessarily right faith, but John 8:59. Then they took him up. Yeah, same account. And they took up stones to throw against him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so passed by. Same account. He just kind of disappeared out of reality, what we know as reality in our three-dimensional world, and went through them. Next one. Uh-oh. What did I do? Hook me up one more slide. One more, not slide, but click. There he goes. Mark 6:41 through 44. Another account, not necessarily stepping up out of the plane, but the miracle of the fishes and the loaves when he fed the 5,000 there. Where did it come from? We don't know. But I know he did it. So, in the interest of time, we'll one more there, Mr. Jacob, Caleb. Sorry. In Revelation 21, 15, 16. This one, I will stop on this one for just a second. And as he talked with me, this is an angel. And as he who talked with me had a gold reed to measure the city, its gates and its wall, the city is laid out as a square. Its length is as great as its breadth. And he measured the city with the reed. 12,000 furlongs in length and breadth and height are equal. Okay, so the city is a cube. How does that work? There's an extra dimension in here. Because, okay, in width and length, this 12,000 furlongs, I think that's what, 1,500 miles? It's a long way. I know from here to Illinois, it's 500 miles. So where Andrea and I used to drive back and forth seeing each other. So 3 times that width, that distance. It's a lot. It's a lot. But there's the city four square. I think so. But the fact is that length, breadth, and height are equal. There's an extra dimension there that I just can't grasp. So I just thought that was a funny little side note there. And now we've got an extra dimension there. I'm going to keep mashing this button until I can figure something out. Okay, another little approach. We've got the flatland concept done. We give another thing. This is kind of thinking about not only God's wisdom, but also God's concept of time. Y'all indulge me for just a little bit. Y'all remember squares. And 2 times 2 is equal to 4. Okay, next one. -1 squared is equal to 1, right? If I take a decimal number, 0.1 squared is equal to 0.1 times 0.1. That gives me 0.01, right? So the thing is, every number squared is always going to be positive. Anybody not seen imaginary numbers? Okay. Therefore, anyway, we'll continue this thing. If we take the square root of these numbers, if I take the square root of 49, I'm going to come up with 7, or -7. I forgot about that one. But if I take any number, it's always going to be, the square root is, we can't take the square root of a number if it's negative, right? Because every number that we multiply by itself will always be positive. Except, so for the example, we take the square root of -1. How do we do that? It doesn't exist. But for the sake of mathematics, some enterprising guy, he was an Irishman back in the late 1880s, actually developed this concept, and he says we can take the square root of -1, and He's developed a thing called quaternions, and that's what makes a whole bunch of cool stuff work. We've got complex numbers. You can represent a number and a direction, a quantity and a direction with what's one number now. You say a real number plus an imaginary number will give you a vector, and we use this for all kinds of stuff. Another thing you can do is you can take the imaginary number and apply it to your spectrum analyzer. This thing is called a Fourier transform. This is what makes these magic little widgets in your pocket work, because it converts waves that go like this into waves that you can see like this. It's crazy. Imaginary numbers, they're everywhere. We just don't see them. Electricity, we use it for that. Electrical engineers use imaginary numbers, and we can describe phasing of electrical power, your voltage leading your current, all kinds of crazy stuff. So anyway, interesting property about this. If I take I times I get, or I times 1, your imaginary number, multiply it by 1, I get I, right? And I'll multiply it again, going around this little circle. If I start and keep multiplying it by I times I is now equal to -1, right? So now I'll take that -1, multiply it by I again, and I keep coming up with these things, and ultimately it multiply it by I 4 times, and it comes back around in this little circle. All right, so what is this useful for? Yes, sir, go ahead.
So how much faith is involved in this?
Oh, I trust it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have faith in you that you understand.
Yeah. It's one of those things that I learned back in 7th grade, I think it was. And anyway, it's there. And then electrical engineers, go off a quick little tangent here. I is also the term for current. So electrical engineers, we have to use the term J. And then there's another one, K, but we won't get into that. I'll show you some other time. Anyway, imagine this same little circle. You keep multiplying by I each time around. Now, imagine we're going to put this thing up on a plane, right? So I can go to this plane. I've got a real axis where I can represent my numbers, and I'm going to represent all my imaginary numbers on a complex plane going up and down. So now I can represent any number out there with its length and its direction by putting it up on this other little concept. So what does this have to do with the scriptures? This is just a way to think about it. I'm not saying it's right. I don't know that it's right because I don't know God's ways. God's ways are not man's ways. But imagine your time on this axis, right? Because I was born, we'll say that this is time right here. I'll try to put it all here. Current time, right now, we are in the year of our Lord, 2024, right here. We don't know when it's going to end, when the Lord is going to come back. That's for him to decide. No, it's for God to decide, the Father to know. Even Jesus doesn't know. Either way, I was born somewhere in here, 1977. And so creation was done back in here. Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth and all the hosts of them were finished, and on the 7th day God ended his work which he had done, and rested the 7th day from all of his work which he had done. Then God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it, because in it he rested from all his work which God had created and had made. The Hebrew word for day is yom, which means a 24-hour day, 24-hour period. So that tells me that, yes, indeed, I will take the biblical account of God's creation of everything here within 6 days and resting on the 7th. So that's what I see there. Also, if God's going to create a tree, is he going to create a sapling? He's going to create a full-up tree, right? So when God's going to create something, he's going to create something complete. We are not to limit God by our minute understanding of what we see as time. The idea of this imaginary axis It's just a way to help me figure out maybe God took a bazillion years and just stuck it in here sideways. So that means that I could go from whatever time it is right now, we'll say 7:35, and at 7:36, he could put in another 100 years sideways. We're not to limit God on what he can do by our minute understanding of what we think might be going on. So it just helps me to understand it. One more, or two more. John 8:58. Jesus said unto them, most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. God, he existed before this little timeline was. So also, we see time going along this way. Try to hold it out where it's a little bit longer. But God can see time like this. And he can see other times like this too. He can turn time on this axis. You know what that means? He sees Adam and Eve in the garden right now. He sees the end of time right now. He sees every minute of my life right now. And at the end of our own lives, when we stand before judgment, we will see our own lives like this as well. Everything condensed into the tiniest bit of time. Because it comes down to this. Well, or this one and one more. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And this one is what it all boils down to. 2 Peter 3:8. But beloved, do not forget this one thing, that with the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as one day. How else can we describe time, one like that? Imaginary numbers is just a way to help me conceptualize it all. And we might finish just a couple minutes early, but this is what it's boiling down to, is that bottom line is God's ways are not our ways, or not man's ways. And we discussed this on there on Wednesday night, or Sunday night, excuse me. My opinion, it's okay to be curious about some things. It's okay to want to learn more. But ultimately, a lot of folks have done this. There's accounts. This, y'all, by the way, this is a great little book. It was written by Apologetics Press. We studied it in an young adult class several years ago, and about evidence for a whole bunch of things, scientific things that have been studied that just wind up bringing us closer back to God. Mr. Kyle Butt was one of the authors on this thing too. Great book. Bottom line is the Eric Lyons and Wayne Jackson. Asking questions is going to lead to more questions. And it's more than likely going to lead us back to a stronger faith. I think there's an account in here, forgive me for not remembering the specifics on it, but there's a guy who went to the Holy Land in the early 1900s, and he was an archaeologist, and he says, I'm going to prove the Bible wrong. And he went over there, and y'all know this account. He studied all the stuff out there and went and found that, well, I can't disprove this thing because there's this evidence here. And then I'm going to disprove the Bible by this other thing. And he wound up going from a complete atheist to being convicted that the biblical account is real because the historical references are real. In archaeology, it's another form of science. I suggest, and chances are, more than likely, it's going to lead you to a stronger faith looking at all this stuff. Examples, look outwards. We've done this. Mankind has always looked out to the stars, and we figure out, okay, well, these stars are a little bigger than we thought. And that is probably 30 years ago now, 25 years ago now, there was a dark spot. There was nothing existed out there in the depths of space. And I wish I'd have brought up this picture. They aimed the Hubble telescope at it, and they said, we're going to see what's out there. And so they had to keep the Hubble aligned with it for like a week because the photons were so weak, well, there were so few photons coming back in that it couldn't make a good image. So it's just like a long exposure for a camera at night. You have to leave the shutter open for a longer time. That's what they had to do for this thing. And when they peered into that hole of nothing, bazillions of complete galaxies out there. And it shows the beauty of God's creation. These are complete galaxies way on out there. I should have brought that picture up. If you want to look inwards, we can look inwards. And so imagine looking at through a microscope. And Mr. Charles Darwin said that, okay, hey, look, there's a cell there. We now know that humans, or that all living matter is composed of cells, and that the Trinity is abolished because, I forget the exact quote, but I would have loved to have seen him and say, no, Dr. Darwin, look a little closer inside that cell. Look at the mitochondria in it. Look at the nucleus and the cell structures. Look at DNA. And there was another professor who was complete agnostic, but then after studying DNA for long enough, he realized that we are created. We cannot have just evolved, because the beauty in this sculpture of molecules that we call DNA, he was convicted that God does exist. Don't know that he became a Christian, but he does know that God exists just by looking and studying DNA for a while. Yes, sir, Brother Ed.
God doesn't ask us to have a blind faith.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
He asks us to examine the evidence.
Mm-hmm. Examine the evidence. And
Romans chapter 1, verse 20, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes. So if his attributes are invisible, what can we know about his attributes? We can't see it, but he goes on and says that they are clearly seen, being understood by the things that he made, even the power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse, and goes on. And so Jesus said, you've seen me, physical flesh, you've seen the Father.
mm-hmm.
All the other attributes.
Yes.
You know, when Thomas said, Lord, unless I can touch you, unless I put your, unless I
Yeah.
can feel the holes, you know, I'm not going to get it. And Jesus says, okay, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
My God and my Lord, you know, he can see. And then Jesus
Yeah.
says, well, blessed are those who haven't seen and yet believe. So we believe based on the evidences that you're pointing out, that we can see these
Mhm.
things. I still don't
Yeah.
understand this whole fourth, fifth dimension thing.
Yeah.
Except I know Kenny Rogers was in the fifth dimension.
He was?
Oh, sorry.
Okay. But yeah, there's some other beautiful studies about the cell. I watched a video about how this guy looked at it's a flagella. It's a little tail on a cell, and it wiggles back and forth, but it turns out it's actually spinning. And they studied it and the little structure that goes around it, and the guy finally realized that's not a structure of molecules. That is an inboard motor. And it really is. It looks and it works. It's more efficient than any of our electric motors, and it's a beautiful little thing. This is next to the last slide, so we're wrapping it up. What's not okay? It's okay to study science, to want to learn more, and to test the spirits. But what's not okay is to limit our understanding of God by what we understand as science. So I've got fossils in my backyard that came out of a cave. I'm serious. And how they got there, how they align with the geological timeline of being bazillions of years old, I can't explain it. But I believe in what the Bible says. Because we have to remember that science as we have made it, our understanding of it, it's man-made. Don't limit God in what he can do. One more slide there. Hook me up there. I'm mashing my buttons wrong. Yeah, so come down to God's love. The third thing that we can't understand about the Lord. 2 Peter 3:9. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some count slackness, but is long-suffering toward us, not willing that anyone should perish, that all should come to repentance. In Romans 5, verses 6 and 8. For while we were still helpless, in the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. But God demonstrates his own love towards us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Y'all, this has got all 3 points that I was discussing on. And I didn't even mean for that to happen until I laid it out there, and I realized that we're talking about wisdom. We don't have to be wise. We don't have to go get a PhD. But we have to believe that Jesus is the Son of God and be immersed through baptism. God's love that we talked about, that we can't, or that we're talking about right now. It's so great that he would send Jesus to this earth so that we can have everlasting life, time that we cannot understand. We talk about spending an eternity, but we can't spend it, because to spend something means that, okay, I'm going to disperse something out. I'm going to disperse money, or I'm going to disperse a little bit of my time, but ultimately I'm going to run out. I spend time, but ultimately I'm going to run out of time. We're not going to run out of eternity. And so it all boils down to, it's simple. We don't have to overthink it. If there's anyone subject to the gospel call, it is simple. God's love for us is simple. Or it's great, but what we have to do to accept his love is simple. If there's anyone subject to the gospel call in any way, if you need to put on the Lord in baptism, we'll help you out.